Want to welcome you all tonight to the Becoming a Lazy Gardener PowerPoint. As Tracy said, I'm Deborah Harries. I'm the Master Gardener that's teaching this class. And before I was a gardener, I was a reader. So I want to thank the Wichita Public Library for giving me free access to gardens around the world. K-State University and K-State Research and Extension and the Master Gardener Program are committed to serving all the members of our community, and we invite you to participate in other programs that we offer, such as gardening, aging and Medicare, food and nutrition, 4-H youth development, agriculture, and FNEP and SNAP Ed. If you have any questions about those, you can go to www.sedgwick.ksu.edu/events or just go to our webpage. Also, you are welcome to call, send us an email, or bring a sample to our office at 21st and Ridge Road in Wichita, Kansas. Now, Extension Master Gardener volunteers are expected to provide recommendations to the public based on research-based information. So in true Master Gardener style, I set out to research lazy gardening and discovered that I wasn't the only one with the idea. I went to my very favorite place besides the Extension Center to do research, the Westlink Branch Public Library. I found all kinds of cool books written by kindred spirits. There was Slow Gardening by Felder Rushing, who wrote, "Slow gardening is more about what you enjoy and savoring what you do." And Fast Plants by Sue Fisher, choosing and growing plants for gardens in a hurry, basically letting the plants do the hard work of filling in the bare spots. Then there was Shrink Your Lawn by Evelyn Madden. She advocates for a diverse landscape since a cookie cutter grass lawn doesn't support wildlife or our imaginations very well. And Eat More Dirt. This one always makes me laugh when I talk about it. Diverting and Instructive Tips for Growing and Tending an Organic Garden by Ellen Sandbeck. She wrote, "Life is a process, not a product. Gardening is also a journey. If it is only enjoyable at its completion, what's the point? The people who get the most pleasure out of their gardens are those who really enjoy puttering around doing garden chores. A list of the garden chores you enjoy and the chores you dislike may be the single most powerful tool you can employ when designing your garden. Give yourself the opportunity to do the kind of work you enjoy and minimize the work you dislike." True lazy gardening. Then there was 100 Easy Perennials by Natalia Hamill. Perennials are the ultimate garden plants. They come back year after year, bringing cheer and beauty to your surroundings. And I love perennials. And then Time-Saving Gardener, Tips and Essential Tasks Season by Season by Carolyn Hutchinson. This one rang my chimes because I love tips and tasks and lists and hints and things like that. Why reinvent the wheel when you can refer to a book where someone else has already done the work? And as Carolyn puts it, there is no real mystery to gardening. Each task is simply a series of steps. If you follow the steps, though, you will be amazed by how much easier the garden is to look after in the long run. The plants will be happier and healthier, and they will do the growing for you, just what is needed for those gardeners with busy lives. And these two gems. You can imagine how happy I was when I found them. I love month-by-month suggestions, and these two books were written for our general growing conditions. Prairie and Plains States, Month-by-Month Gardening, written by Kathy Wilkinson Barash, and Month-by-Month Gardening in Kansas by Mike Miller. And finally, this guy. He wrote an article in May 26, 2022, which I think is after I agreed to do this presentation. His name is N. Jordan Franklin, and he's a consumer horticulture extension agent in Clemson University. And he wrote an article called Be a Lazy Gardener and KISS for Healthy Plants. Well, KISS stands for, according to him, KISS stands for Keep It Simple, Sweetie, or Softy, or there's lots of other words you can use, but hey, keep it simple is the basic thought. He said, come to the dark side, be a lazy gardener like me. We have cookies inside in the air conditioning. And then he says, okay, maybe I'm not inside in the air conditioner, but I do love a good chocolate chip cookie. So what's not to like about this fella? He also said in the article, I often tell people that I am a lazy gardener, and it's true. I don't want to spend any more time working on my landscape or vegetable garden than is necessary. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy plants very much. However, the key word here is to enjoy. Spending endless hours, especially during our hot South Carolina, and I will inject in here Kansas summers, fighting or babying sensitive plants is not my idea of enjoyment. Now, this is my very first garden, where my personal gardening life started. I gardened with my folks, I gardened with my grandparents, but this was a garden I could call my very own. It was in front of my family's porch, and it was all perennials, daffodils, violets, and miniature iris. Oh, and a boot scraper. So it was pretty easy to care for. Leap ahead 30 years, and I was living in a home of my own with my husband and kids. I decided I was tired of all the upkeep my front yard demanded, so I decided to plant flowers. And it was a pretty small lawn, but I had a lot more energy back then. So I planted flowers. I just went to the garden center and chose stuff I liked. Oh, and I had inherited a bunch of my grandma's iris. What to do, what to do, what to do. Well, I planted those iris. And do you know what the funny thing is about iris? They multiply. So I made more iris beds and planted more iris. Then we got fancy and decided to add a river rock border. Trust me, if you want to be a lazy or satisfied gardener, river rock is not your friend. You end up having to dig weeds out, and I don't care how much fabric you put down underneath it or how much you spray it, river rock is not your friend. And then, if you didn't notice, I became obsessed with iris. My yard was finally to the point where there was not much else but iris. Somewhere along the line, I discovered free mulch at the zoo. Free anything is great, right? So I mulched all the pathways and made the yard easier to traverse. And my yard started taking on a different shape, but still with the iris. And granted, in May, they were gorgeous, but the rest of the year, they weren't very interesting. So I started adding daylilies to the mix. And I've always loved daylilies, but they weren't iris. So I felt a little guilty bringing them in. Just a little bit too much mixture. Now, in March of 2016, when this photo was taken, it had seemed to me that my world had come crashing down. I had been diagnosed with cancer the previous fall. I had to focus on healing. I discovered what really mattered was enjoying my garden instead of having to work at it all the time to keep it nice. I simply had no energy to do so. I had to get smarter, not work harder. I worked on being a satisfied gardener from that point forward. I dug up almost all the iris and gave them away and planted lots of other plants that gave me joy. Now you can see in the left-hand part of the picture, there's still a lot of iris, but the whole yard wasn't full of them anymore. Now, when we moved into our neighborhood in the mid-90s, it had just been converted from a farmer's wheat field to a single-family homes. There were no trees, just and new grass. And then that was it about the year 2000. And today there are numerous trees, shrubs, plants in every kind of yard, from totally weed-ridden to beautifully landscaped and manicured. My point being that becoming a satisfied gardener is a process. There is no simple way of going from barren to beautiful without having some cloudy, rainy days. So remember to watch for the rainbows along the way. And this was just a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you remember, before the horrible hot, we had this lovely wet storm, and I happened to catch the rainbow. So remember to catch those rainbows. And here's where I pull my little switcheroo. I'm not really a lazy gardener. I just want to be a satisfied gardener. And I want you to believe you have permission to be a satisfied gardener too. Tracy, are there any questions?
Not at this time, Deborah. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So the first step in becoming a truly satisfied gardener is choosing the right plants, because you want to put the right plants in the right place. And we're going to talk about the right place in a little bit. I'll give you a little hint, since I promised tips, tricks, and hints. Choose native plants or tried and true introduced species. They are typically pest-free and easy to maintain. So you can choose by size, color, bloom period, the flower, the plant structure, either cold or hot temperature hardiness, the type of soil that's required by the plant, or the type of soil that you actually have, how much sun or shade the plant requires, or you really need to be paying attention to that in your yard, drought tolerance, potential diseases and pests, and amount of maintenance needed. That's my main criterion. Some people love fussy plants. I like to put them in the ground and leave them and let nature take care of them, the plants themselves. Now, this is a plant hardiness zone map for Kansas, and Wichita is in the 6B hardiness zone, which means that on average, the minimum temperature in winter is going to be -5 to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, everybody knows we've had warm winters and colder winters. This is just an average annual extreme. It is important to make sure that your plant will survive in our Kansas winters, so you need to read plant information carefully if you're buying a new plant, especially if you're buying a plant from a catalog. Because perennials sold for South Texas climates, way down south, Gulf of Mexico area, those plants in Kansas are more likely to act like annuals than perennials. In fact, a lot of them would end up dying if you tried to overwinter them, unless you bring them inside. And this is a newer map. The American Horticultural Society came up with it, and it's a plant heat zone map. It displays the average number of days per year above 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's 86 because in Celsius, it's 30 degrees, which is what most of the world uses for their temperature gauge. But so 86, 30 degrees, that's kind of how they do it. Now in Kansas, depending on where you live, and it's really hard to tell from this map, so I've kind of put us in zone 8 and 7. Zone 7 is greater than 60 to 90 days per year of really hot temperatures, and zone 8 is greater than 90 to 120 days per year. And if your plants can't handle a lot of heat, they may not make it. This year has been such a very strange year with all of the excessive heat. So especially if you have questions, call our hotline or come up to the extension office and we'll be glad to talk to you about it. But if you're seeing stressed plants, it's because we had a very, very cold winter and a very, very hot summer. And it's not always the season you're in that you need to look at for why your plants are distressed. It's been a difficult year for all of our plants. Now, this is why I like perennials best. Annuals are plants that live only 1 year or season, and the plant must grow from seed every year. Perennial, oh, and I actually took this in my garden. All these pictures are from my garden, unless I tell you otherwise. From years past. This year, I didn't take a lot of pictures because it's been such a terrible year for taking pictures. This is a picture of Portulaca Grandiflora, or moss rose, as I usually call it. And I love moss rose, but they don't come out very quickly in the season. And I can't always depend on them coming back because they do rely on their seeds dropping to sow the next year's crop. Now, perennials are plants that live for 3 or more years, producing leaves and stems each year from rootstock, crown buds, or branches. And this is actually a grocery store rose that I bought about 15 years ago. And today it's about 3.5, 4 feet tall. So it's come back and come back and come back and gotten stronger and taller. And it's a very happy rose. And this is why I no longer buy annuals. I really feel bad about these. This was several years ago. I've actually been given some tomatoes and they suffer. I'm sorry to tell you this, they suffer about the same fate because I put them in and then I forget to water them and they get unhappy and then I water them too much. I'm not really good at annuals. I'm much better with perennials. What I really prefer to do is plant them and leave them. I baby them the first year and then I let them go. And the perennials that I tend to put in, they tend to stick around. Now, if you're looking to start a gardener, or even if you're just looking to learn some new ideas or review, see if what you know is still the current wisdom, I recommend the K-State Garden Hour on YouTube, or if you can do it, K-State Garden Hour live, because you can ask questions of the presenters while they're presenting. And this is one way you can use to choose plants you want. You can register for the free Zoom webinar, or again, you can wait until after the live presentation to find the class on YouTube. And one of the classes I really enjoyed that I have watched is the best plants for a beginner's landscape. It's not just for beginners, just talking about being reminded of the right plants for my landscape really helped me in some of the decisions I've made. And like they said in the blurb, nobody wants to invest time, effort, and money into a landscape only to discover that they chose the wrong plants, because that's no fun for anybody. Now, Landscaping 101, I really enjoyed it. I probably shouldn't choose favorites, but I mean, both of these were two of my very favorites, Landscaping 101 and Xeriscaping. Landscaping 101, I learned a lot about design principles, and I kind of knew design principles, but the person teaching this class really made it simple to understand. In Xeriscaping is it's not a new idea, but it's kind of coming into its own because of all the drought and the heat that we've been having. And that you can go to see Xeriscape gardens. I know for sure there's one in Botanica. I know there's others around. I try to have my yard, it's landscaped under Xeriscape principles. But it's what I really like about Xeriscaping is there's little or no water outside of natural rainfall. Now, it's really important if you're not sure about your soil to get your soil tested. And when you're planting perennials, they generally do best in well-drained fertile soil, depending on the perennial. Some perennials will tolerate anything, but other perennials are kind of finicky and picky. So it's important that you know what your soil is like. So go ahead and get your soil tested if you're not sure. And you can bring your soil tests up here to the Sedgwick County Extension Office, and we'll be glad to get those taken care of for you. I do have to put a disclaimer, there is a cost to it, but it's, if you spend $22 now on a soil test and then you don't buy the wrong plants, you could save hundreds of dollars just by knowing what your soil is like. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about gardening sunlight, because it's important for your planning to know what your garden is going to be receiving. So there's full sunlight, which is 6 or more hours of direct sunlight per day. And those 6 hours of sun have to be direct full sunlight, but it doesn't have to be all the time. So you can have 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours midday, 2 hours in the afternoon. And that's good enough for plants that require full sunlight. Or you could just have a full 8 hours of sun through the day. It doesn't matter, as long as those plants are getting at least 6 full hours of sun per day. Partial sun, if you see that on a tag that you're buying, partial sun means between 4 and 6 hours a day. And partial shade is between 2 and 4 hours of full sun a day. And these are some of the these are some of the sun-loving perennials I have grown in my garden. There's the daylily on the left, and then an iris. I told you I was obsessed about iris on the right. And then there's gardening shade. And shade means less than 2 hours of sunlight a day. You can have light shade, and that's partially filtered sun where it says an ever-moving pattern of sun and shade. So it's dappled or intermittent shade. Then there's moderate shade. So when you step into a forest and it's kind of not full sun, but there's light in there, that's moderate shade. And then heavier dense shade, like at the bottom of at the base of a north-facing wall or below dense evergreen trees. And all plants need some plant to survive. Excuse me. All plants need some light to survive. So you can't just stick a plant in the garage shed, in your shed, and never turn on the light and let it sit there for years and years and years and expect it to last. And these are some of my shade-loving perennials. To the left is Hutchinson or coral bells, and to the right is Columbine. And this is an example of light or dappled or intermittent shade. And the Columbine here is the Columbine here. And Columbine, I'll be talking about it a little bit more pretty quick. So where do you find perennials? You can find them at farmers markets, nurseries, online catalogs. I warned you about those. I love online catalogs in the winter, because you can sit in January or February and look at those catalogs and just dream about the hot summer. And then in the hot summer, you can dream in the air conditioning about dreaming about the online catalogs. Anyway, you can get them at the grocery store, the hardware store, any kind of store that sells plants. Hopefully your family and your friends will share them with you. Obviously, fellow gardeners, we typically love to share our plants with each other. And I want to caution you about getting them from the wild outdoors. You really need permission, because there are very few places you can actually go and dig plants and have it not be a problem. If you go, say, to a farmer's field and you don't ask him, that's trespassing. But also, you can't go to federal and state parks and dig those plants without permission either. So just make sure you have permission before you do any bringing perennials home. And I wanted to talk a little bit about sharing plants, because that's my favorite way to get them and my favorite way to share with other people. This right here is one of my newest gifted plants in between some of my oldest gifted plants. It's really important that you know the actual plant names if you want to talk intelligently with them about, you don't talk to your plants, Talk with your plants. Well, I talk with my plants and talk to my plants, but what I'm trying to say is it's important to talk intelligently with other gardeners about your plants with real names. However, in the privacy of your own garden, it is truly okay to give them nicknames. So I have Great Aunt Olga's onions. I have Sarah's dad's daylilies, which are shown. I have Deanna's Columbine, which is shown, and Grandma Naylor's honeysuckle vine. Here is a really good list you can take, the Prairie Bloom Perennial Flowers. These are best of the best flowers that were tested for 3 to 5 years by K-State. The only thing is the Prairie Bloom program is not doing any ongoing research, so the list may get a little old, but the varieties recommended will still grow just fine. And if you want a copy of the Prairie Bloom Perennial Flowers, either email the hotline and ask them for a copy, or you can email me directly, and I'd be glad to send you out a copy of that. Or you can look for it online. Just Google Prairie Bloom Perennial Flowers, and it should pop right up. Now, Prairie Bloom is not a commercial brand or product line. So, and plants in garden centers are not going to be labeled as Prairie Bloom because they're not a commercial brand. And it's unlikely that any one nursery is going to carry all the listed varieties. So in order to get a Prairie Bloom plant that you can trust, shop for specific varieties like Shasta Daisy, Becky, instead of just asking for a daisy. But if you want to go to get additional recommendations from K-State for perennials, you go to kansasroots.org, and that's what is pictured to the right. Now, when you are actually choosing your plants, you want to choose healthy plants. And I say beware the bargain bin, not because I want you to avoid it, but because I want you to just buy stuff you think you can handle. Now, I have been guilty of being a bleeding heart and finding a distressed plant in the grocery store. But I always check it because I have brought pests home in the past from places that I've either purchased or been given plants. And that's not good because I want to protect the plants that I already have at home. So only accept healthy plants unless you know how to deal with the problem. Be sure to inspect the plants both when you receive them or buy them and before planting, because plant pathogens and insects can be introduced from garden to garden in plants and soil. You want to look for really good, robust root systems and deep green leaves. And you want to watch out for leaf spots and blemishes. But sometimes those blemishes can be, say, if you buy them from the grocery store, somebody's shopping cart rolled past them and bruised them. Or maybe you want to buy them from a big box store, and the person taking care of the plants didn't realize they needed to water them as often as they should. Or it could truly be disease. So just be careful. Then watering is important for new plants. Again, if you adhere to xeriscaping and you want to just allow those plants to get rainfall, it's still important for brand new plants. You need to take good care of them. You can't truly be a lazy gardener with brand new plants because you need to make sure that they're gonna last the first season so they get their root system going and they are comfortable in their environment. So when you first plant plants, water them well, and then continue watering them 2 to 3 times per week for 3 to 4 weeks after planting. And a good rule of thumb is to give them about 1 inch of water per week for the first growing season. And then once they're established, just give them water as they are required or as you think they need. It's really good for plants if you water them deeply and less frequently, because that promotes deeper rooting that reduces the need for extra watering. Some people believe in watering every day. that's really not good for the plants because it helps them to depend on the extra water instead of searching for water deeper down in the ground. You also want to avoid wetting those leaves because that encourages disease. The best way to do it is to apply water to the soil around the base of the plant. And you want to water early in the day so the leaves have a chance to dry quickly. It's also important that you water in the evening instead of, especially you don't want to, in a hot season like this, you don't want to water in the middle of the day because that water can actually scald those leaves. One thing that's important, especially in a drought or in extremely hot weather, is that you triage the watering that you do. If you can't water everything like it needs to be watered, you really want to water your large established trees first and make sure they get enough water because they're expensive to remove, expensive to replace, and they take years to become large enough to fulfill their purpose. And then next in the triage would be trees planted in the last 2 to 3 years because their root systems are still not completely established. Normally, these trees would be first on our list because the larger, more mature trees are more drought resistant. But sometimes a drought will be severe enough that even large trees will die or become so weakened that the insects, the pests move in and take them out. And then you want to make sure your shrubs get watered, and then perennial flowers, and finally lawns, annual flowers, and vegetables. And you probably see a pattern here. You want to start with what's most expensive to replace and move down from there. Now, once your perennials bloom, these are iris again. I realize I'm still kind of obsessed with iris. When the perennials bloom, cut those old blooms off slightly below the flower head. And this will improve the blooming, will prolong the blooming period, and it does improve the plant's appearance. Now, for plants on stems like daylilies and iris, the flowers that you see on the stem, those are the only flowers you're going to get. But even with those, it makes them look nicer to go ahead and deadhead them too. Tracy, are there any questions?
Yes, there is, Deborah. I think actually there might be 2. Okay, so the first question was from Susie, and it's, are plants growing along the highway okay to dig up or collect seed? And she was specifically thinking of I-35 going north.
My concern there, number 1, is your own safety. And number 2, I don't know that it's so much of a problem, but if everybody did it, think about what would happen. That one, I would call the state highway, not the highway. That one I don't have a hard answer for. I'm a little concerned about that because it is public land, but it's also, again, your safety because of the cars. So that one, why don't you email me that question if you want, and we can chat about it, or better yet, ask either the people who maintain the highways or somebody else. So I hate to dodge that question like that, but I don't have a really solid answer for that.
Okay. And someone did say ask KDOT perhaps.
Thank you.
That in the chat.
Yeah.
And
KDOT's
then
good.
The second question was, do you have any tips for watering deeper and less frequently? I tend to give my plants about 10 to 20 seconds of water a day, and it takes me about 15 minutes. While not watering every day would be overall less time, it would draw out the time I need to spend watering on those days.
Well, the best practice is to water about 1 inch a week in a drought, if you can do that. And the way you can test your hoses is to put a tuna can out and you let your sprinklers run or you let your hose run over the area that you're watering until that fills up, because that's an inch. So that's how long you need to water until you have that inch. So does that help, or do you have a more specific question about that? The person who asked if you could, did that answer your question?
Ricky actually said thanks, and that was exactly the information that Ricky needed. So thank you so much,
Good.
Deborah. And those were the questions that were offered. And then Sherry did indicate that it's illegal to stop along interstates unless it is an emergency.
Thank you,
So
Sherry.
that's for all of us.
Okay, any other questions?
And that's it at this time.
Great, thank you. Mulching is another way to make your plants really, really happy, and also saves you a lot of work, because it helps conserve moisture. So you know that water is going to stay a little closer to the plant than just kind of running off. It also insulates the ground, and it helps keep weed growth out. It's important to keep the mulch away from the plant crowns to reduce the chance of fungal diseases. It's also very, very important to keep it away from tree bases. Leave a couple of inches. What we talk about it is we call it a donut around the base of the tree. So you don't want it right up against the tree. You want there to be a little bit of room in between the mulch and the tree, so the tree has some room to breathe, basically. And this is our next to our demonstration garden several years ago, when they were working on making it look really nice. And yeah, there we go. This is it just a couple of days ago. I love that garden. I actually sit out there to eat lunch sometimes. And that's, to me, that really shows how helpful mulch is, because the tree's doing great, those plants are doing great. And it's a nice place to walk on. It's soft, it feels nice. Typically, you want to mulch before growth emerges in the spring, or I actually mulch when I plant those plants, and then I make sure to mulch again in the spring. And I usually refresh the mulch around the perennials in the fall, because I want to protect against cold temperatures. And if there's excess mulch, you can remove it safely, typically in mid-March, depending on weather factors. Obviously, if it's still snowing, you don't want to remove it, but typically you can remove it then. And by excess mulch, I'm talking about maybe the leaves that got blown into your garden. Stuff tends to accumulate around the plants that wasn't necessarily there. And here are some examples of appropriate mulch: straw, tree leaf mulch, shredded bark, wood chips, compost. Excuse me. And this is a good way to get free leaf mulch. You just rake up your leaves into a pile, run the lawnmower over a couple of times, and voila, you get free mulch. So I like the free mulch. I do that a lot with my leaves in the fall. Now, perennials as a whole are not really prone to major disease and insect problems, but everything has some problems on occasion. If you have heavily invested plants, you want to take the dead plant leaves out in the fall, because those leaves can actually harbor disease and unwanted insects that can survive the winter. If you want to leave, you can, depending on the plant, you can prune them, but it's sometimes nice to leave the perennial tops until spring, because they insulate the plant, they help shelter helpful insects, and they catch snow and provide winter beauty and seeds for the birds. Now, if a plant is doing poorly in a certain spot, even though it's getting the absolute best of care, you need to consider the microclimate effect. And microclimates are a set of conditions that are different than the surrounding area. And it can be, your side yard might be different than your front yard, might be different than your backyard. So it's based on how directly and how long the sun strikes an area. You can have an area in your yard that maybe just even by moving a rock might help the plants that are there. So just kind of keep an eye on your landscape to see changes in sun and shade, and also obviously check after major storms. That's going to be pretty hard to avoid. If you had a huge tree in your yard and a huge wind knocks it down, you're probably going to have to do something fairly quickly with the plants that were used to all that shade from the shade tree, because you've all of a sudden got a full sun yard. So just kind of keep an eye on your yard. When you're planting your garden, or even when you're just changing things around a little bit, and I do that every couple of years, I'll stick in a new garden plot. Be sure to include interesting things like wood or rock or stone or statues. These are the hardscapes of your garden. Now, I have a bunch of limestone and other large rocks that I have collected over the years, and I tend to play with them like Legos. I'll outline a little outline with limestone rocks and say, okay, this looks good. And then I'll put a bunch of plants in there. And again, I move them around. So it's fun. And then when the zoo had free mulch, they also had free logs. So you're seeing one of the free logs that I picked up just for extra interest in the yard. And you can use them to cover bare spots or just be interesting. The trouble with those are just like any other of the plant-based things. They do eventually rot. So, but it was free. So I just replaced that particular one with something else. This is some more hardscape in my yard. The mulch you see down there was actually from Christmas tree mulch. That's another good place. Well, and you can't get free mulch from the zoo, I don't think, anymore. They stopped a couple of years ago. I'm not sure if they've started again. What used to be was the energy companies, when they cut down trees, they would put free mulch out in the zoo parking lot for people to pick up. And when they started the construction of the new zoo improvements, they took that out, and I'm not sure if they've started that back up again. But that's where I used to get all my free mulch, was there and at Christmas tree drop-off sites in December. In this picture also, you see some wood violets. I have loved those ever since my very first garden, and I don't know that my neighbors particularly like them, because they do kind of tend to they grow by rhizomes, and they do tend to go all over. But if my neighbor were to get upset with me, I would come and very happily dig them out for them, but nobody's said anything yet. And this is a rose in my front yard. And you can see borders there of rocks, barely. I use rocks for borders everywhere. I think that's a fun way to maintain boundaries between the yard and the flowers. More rocks, more flowers. And yes, that mulch is black. Funny story there. When I decided to treat my entire front yard as one big garden, I ordered several pallets of what I thought was brown mulch. And it was dropped off, and it was black mulch. And yes, I had ordered black mulch. I thought I had ordered brown. So I couldn't take it back. So I made the best of it. And it's actually kind of nice, because it does make the plant stand out better. But you kind of have to stop and laugh at yourself sometimes, and make do with what you have. That's part of being a satisfied gardener. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and give you information about some of the perennials that I have found to be successful in my own garden. The first one is Clematis. And depending on the variety, they can be anywhere from 6 to 20 feet tall, anywhere from 3 to 6 feet wide, and lots of pretty bloom colors. and I didn't realize this until I had done this research for this presentation. There's a large flowering kind and a small flowering kind, and they actually bloom in different time periods. Now they're pretty drought tolerant, but they do need some extra water during the hot, dry weather. And they do need some support for their vine so that they can vine and display their flowers. See, they were coming up over my porch. I do know by experience, if you just let them go, they kind of puddle, and it's not the prettiest, but I mean, they tolerate it. They do require full to partial sun, and they need fairly well-drained and moisture-retentive soil. Next is Columbine, and you've already seen a couple of my Columbines, so I chose a prettier picture. They have all kinds of pretty varieties. Their height can be anywhere from 1 to 3 feet, 9 to 18 inches wide. They tend to be bicolor, which means they have two different colors in their bloom. They are extremely drought tolerant, and I have found mine, I've watered them a little bit, but they're still hanging in there. They look very delicate, but they do quite well. You don't really need to maintain them. When I had the presentation on Tuesday, somebody asked if they needed to cut back the seed heads. You can, or you don't need to. It's just your preference. I let mine go because I like to let the seeds scatter to see where else they're going to show up. And they have shown up all over my yard. I really enjoy that. And I take out the ones I don't want, but I do tend to let nature take its course in my yard. It's fun to see what shows up. They tolerate all kinds of soils except really heavy, poorly drained soils. Next is daylilies. I really love daylilies, and I very much agree with the Daylily Society that says the daylily is sometimes referred to as the perfect perennial, which I think that's kind of funny, but it really is. You can mow them down, and next year they will come right back up. And my daylilies this year, they bloomed, and the blooms were great, but the plants right now look horrible, and I feel really bad. But I know that they're going to come back next year, or I hope they're going to come back next year, because they're very, very good at tolerating drought. Then there's another mini daylily called Stella De Oro, and I have a lot of these in my yard. They tended to be kind of overused in the 90s, but I think they're cute, so I have a bunch of them. They're 9 to 12 inches tall and high, and there is also another. There's a newer color, and I can't remember what color it is, but the Stella De Oro is the yellow right now. Tolerates just like the bigger version. They tolerate drought really well, and they tolerate most soils, which I really appreciate too. This is a hosta that I grew, and it did really, really well in that spot, but they are very touchy if you put them into bright full sun, because they really like part to full shade. And I accidentally, this was before I was a master gardener and before I knew about hostas, I divided it and shared some with a friend, but the one that I put back in the ground wasn't in this lovely shady spot. I put it in full sun, and I don't have it anymore, so I regret that. But hostas are fairly easy to grow. They don't require a lot of maintenance, but you do need to protect them a little bit, because those leaves that's the showiest part of them, and wind and hail and stuff like that kind of mark them up. They do bloom, and they have some very pretty blooms, I think, but people don't typically buy hostas for the blooms. They typically buy them for the leaves, because they have lots and lots of different kinds of varieties. And Tracy, are there any questions now?
Yes, there are actually 3 different questions. Okay,
go ahead.
So the first one is, do you recommend mulching iris?
Yes, except iris are kind of funny. You got to make sure that iris have a rhizome, and just the tip of the rhizome needs to be outside of the soil because they love the sunshine. But I go ahead and mulch around the plant because the rest of the plant needs to be protected. So yes, I do mulch my iris, but make sure that you leave that little tip of the rhizome out so they can get the sunshine they need.
Okay, so the next question is there a chip drop in Wichita?
I should have anticipated that question. I don't know of one right now. I do believe, and somebody else will probably put in the chat, I believe there used to be, I think you could call the energy companies and ask them to drop off if they were doing local chipping, but I don't have a good answer for that. So that's a good question for hotline, or you can certainly email me later.
Okay, so another one is the best season to introduce new perennials, fall, spring, or does it vary based on the individual plant?
Good question, and it does vary. There are some plants that like fall, and there's other plants that like spring. The funny thing about iris and daylilies, the wisdom is that you want to put them in, you want to take care of them and make sure that they're happy in July, and then plant them later on. My grandma grew iris, and this is anecdotal. This is not case data approved, but anecdotally, you can take an iris or a daylily just about any time, even with the blooms on. So I don't recommend that, but I have seen it done. But it truly does depend on the plant, whether it's going to be happier in the spring or in the fall. And I do recommend that you research that, because you want that plant to have its very first season to have a good start. And if you just take it out and plunk it in the ground in March, and it wanted to be planted in September, it's not going to have a good start to its life. So that's why you want to do that.
And then Deborah, while you were talking, just a couple of things. Debbie indicated that Derby has a chip site, but you have to live in Derby in order to actually to benefit from it. But the other one is that another question came up.
Okay.
Do you fertilize your plants regularly?
No, I don't. I am a very lazy gardener. And that's part of my philosophy. Some people do, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with fertilizing your plants. Although I do recommend you, I strongly urge you to get your soil tested if you're going to do that, because you can actually over fertilize. Some people, for example, use their green grass clippings around their plants. And I had a fellow talking to me about his tomatoes, and he said, well, I have these gorgeous tomatoes. The plants are gorgeous. They're bright green and they're very, very happy, but they're not producing any fruit. And he had been using the nitrogen rich green grass mulch. And so there are points where you want to fertilize, but there's also places where you don't. So that's something you need to research for your own individual plants. But no, I don't fertilize mine. They're quite happy surviving on their own. Again, like I said before, I use the Xeriscape philosophy and the lazy gardener philosophy, and that's basically letting nature take care of itself, and they do okay. Now, I don't have show blooms, but I don't want show blooms. I just want plants that I can enjoy. If you want to have gorgeous showy blooms that win blue ribbons, yeah, you probably ought to fertilize, but I don't.
Okay, and I'm going to let you know that several more questions came in while you were talking.
Sure, we've got time. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first was, when should you plant hosta, spring or fall?
Good question. I'd have to research that. So please call the hotline on that one. I apologize that I don't know that.
Okay. What would you consider organically rich soil?
Oh, golly. That's a good question. And I don't have a good answer for that because organic is kind of a touchy word because it's organic. What I consider to be good soil is soil that has been composted and has been turned a little bit, but only when you need to, because really happy soil doesn't want to be disturbed. So if you want to amend your soil to make it easier to grow plants, I recommend that. But I don't feel like I have a really good answer for that one either. So either I need to do some research for you, or again, you need to call the hotline.
Okay, and then if you have mulch around your flowers, will the seeds from your flowers get through to come back next year? Or is it better to save the flower heads and put down in the spring?
I've done it both ways. I don't know research-based what would be the best answer, but I've done it both ways. And depending on the plant, you'd probably get more plants out of actually saving the seed heads. So it just depends on your garden philosophy, how you want to handle that. Either way is fine. Either way will probably work.
Okay, and that actually concludes the questions at this time.
Okay, thanks everybody for asking questions. And I appreciate the good questions. I wish I had better answers for everything. That's one of the things about being a master gardener, though. We don't know it all. We really don't. And some of us specialize in certain categories. So please don't ever expect a master gardener to know it all. That's why we tell you to call the hotline. And what happens in hotline is if we don't know the answer, we either know who does or we know how to research it, and we will get you a research-based good answer. And it's a lot of fun to work in hotline because there's a lot of learning that goes on. And I think I know a lot of things sometimes, and then I work the hotline and answer questions, and people have really good questions. And so thank you for asking them, and keep asking them. Just sometimes I don't have the answers. So Iris, told you I was a little obsessed. These are the K-State Gardens in Manhattan, Kansas. And if you can ever get up there in May, I strongly encourage you to do so. I find Iris to be some of the most beautiful flowers on earth, but I am very, very partial. Depending on the variety, you can have them anywhere from a 1/2 foot tall to 3 feet tall, and they're spread 1/2 foot to 3 feet spread. Almost every color of the rainbow, which I think is really cool. And their bloom period is actually March through October, depending on the variety. Most of them we see. Well, okay, let me get more specific. In fact, I'll just switch to the next slide because these are my very favorite bearded iris, and I know the most about these because I've grown up with them. They are, again, every color of the rainbow. They typically bloom April to May, but some varieties do rebloom in the fall, which is unusual, but I've seen it, and it does happen. They have to have the right circumstances to do that, though. They do prefer drier soils. They do require full sun to part shade. I do have some in the dappled shade that I showed you earlier, and they do okay, but they don't bloom as much. So plant-wise, they do fine in shade, but if you want them to bloom, they really need that full sun. Sorry. These are some prickly pear cactus in my backyard. This is what it looked like this year, and I was thrilled to pieces. It's been in the same spot for over 10 years, so I think it's pretty happy. Just based on the flowers, it just looks like a very happy plant there. And prickly pear cactus, depending on the variety, can be anywhere from 1/2 foot to 8 feet tall. Spread the same. They are either yellow or pink flowers, They typically bloom in June or July, and their drought tolerance, believe it or not, depends on the variety. Now, mine have done pretty well so far. They have not caved in like sometimes they will do. They'll kind of shrink. I never maintain those things. I just look at them every year and smile and say, yeah, you got a little bigger. They do need full sun. And the soil back there where they are planted is pretty dry and sandy, but it's also kind of clayey. So I'm a little surprised that they've been doing as well as they do. This is the actual plot that they're in. And some very polite person asked if that was a juga, and no, those are actually weeds. That's henbit. By the way, did you know that henbit is edible? I learned that this week, and so now I have an excuse for all the henbit in my back 40 of my yard. And it's also one of the in-process projects. One of these years, I am actually going to get in and make that turn into a very pretty plot. But at the moment, it's one of our not on the top burner, not on the front burner kinds of projects. Oh, and also I have a prickly pear that I've had in a pot that's done well for years. The problem with that little prickly pear in the pot is that it gets weeds in the pot, and I worry about the weeds overtaking the plant. So I try to weed that pot every once in a while. And you have to be careful when you're weeding around prickly pears because they have these really tiny spiky spines. And so when I went to weed it this last time, I did it without gloves on, which is never garden around prickly pears without gloves on, because I got spines in my thumb, and I'm still picking them out a week later. So let's see, switching gears to roses. These are the roses at the Extension Center. This is a couple of years ago. They're this pretty this year too, where they were. The rose people have been taking as good a care as they can, watering and all of that. There are actually easy care roses, and it used to be thought that in Kansas you couldn't grow very many roses because they were so finicky. But there are actually roses that are hardy in the Kansas climate. They have above average disease resistance. They don't need pesticide sprays, and all you have to do is look for disease resistant on the tag. So you can choose pretty much any kind of rose you want, as long as it's a hardy in Kansas kind. And if you want to either call the hotline or send me an email, I'd be glad to send you out a pamphlet about easy care roses. Now, one of the things about easy care roses is they're grown on their own roots. So I want to talk about grafted roses for a minute. Imagine planting a small and gentle coral or white or yellow rose plant, and next year discovering that it turned red. That happens sometimes when you have a grafted rose. Now, grafting is where the plant stem of a less hardy rose is attached to the rootstock of a more hardy rose, and the canes of the grafted rose from this attachment knot. It's called a knot. Now, if the graft and the canes attached to it die, so does that less hardy rose. Another thing about grafted roses is that the hardy rootstock can also send out suckers that choke out the less hardy grafted rose. And the stock rose may not be appropriate for the rose it replaced. You may have chosen a plant that you wanted for its small growing habits, or because it's yellow, or because it's peach colored. And so your color scheme is all peach or yellow, and the bright red rose that comes out doesn't quite fit in your garden. The other thing is that most grafted roses don't last for longer than about 15 years. Roses that are grown on their own roots can live up to and longer than 50 years old. The problem with roses is that there is a disease called rosette disease. And if you ever get it, you will never forget it, and you will know it because it's very distinctive. The stems get long, they get red, they get these really ugly thorns. It's just, it's really sad. And the horrible thing about it is that you have to get rid of that rose. You can't keep a plant that's got diseases that has the rosette disease. You can keep plants with other diseases as long as they can be treated, but rosette disease is there is no cure for it right now. And if you need this publication, the rosette disease publication, be sure to send me an email, or again, call the hotline and ask them for it. Now, on a happier note, I wanted to brag a little bit about my pear tree this year. It really produced some gorgeous pears. And I have to tell you, I was so excited about these pears because I ate a pear from my tree last year and it was delicious. And then the free labor moved in. What's better than free labor? Squirrels. It was squirrels. This is a squirrel splooting for you. This is my squirrel. She does this frequently. My dog likes to chase her around the yard, and she will run up into the upper limbs and just hang out and look at us and be quite happy. I didn't taste any of the pears this year because she picked them. Well, she and her whole family picked them. But the one thing about being a satisfied gardener is the happiest thing about it is that you learn to chuckle about the silly things that happen. And I didn't plant the pear tree because I thought I was going to harvest a bazillion pears. And if I had really cared about those pears, I would have taken good care of them and put squirrel resistant nets around them. But I really don't care. I feed the squirrels and they seem to be happy with me, and they're fun for my dog to chase. So squirrels have a purpose too. And then there's pollinators. And squirrels can be pollinators too, believe it or not. But pollinators typically are more like bats and bees and beetles, birds, butterflies, flies, other kinds of mammals, moths, wasps, and people. The Pollinator Society, there's lots of different groups that talk about pollinating. Our future flies on the wings of pollinators. There's lots of really pretty posters. Pollinators are important because most plants can't reproduce or produce fruit without pollination. Now, here's a fun fact for you. I've lived in Kansas all my life and didn't realize this until I started researching for this. Wheat is pollinated by the wind. So wheat doesn't require pollinators, but lots of other things do. So if you ever get a chance to plant a pollinating, a garden that helps pollinators, it's a good idea. Now, here are some of the common plants for pollinators. And there's a fly that's pollinating my yarrow that I had up front for a couple of years. Cone flowers, blanket flowers, goldenrod, lots and lots of different kinds of pollinators and plants. Oh, switched gears too soon. Butterfly pollinator gardens are really a hot topic these years because the oh heavens, monarchs, sorry, couldn't think of their name. Monarchs have actually been placed on the endangered species list because they are struggling now. So if you only plant one year, you might consider only plant one plant this year. You might consider planting a milkweed that monarchs like, just to help them on their way when they migrate from up north down south. So if I were a farmer, aha, this is out of order. That's the problem. Okay, I apologize. The migratory monarch butterfly is known for being endangered, and it is this is one of the handouts we have here at the Extension Center that I can email you, or you can come pick up a copy of it, or again, call hotline and ask them for a copy. So, okay, there we go. These little critters are a reminder that pollinators have different shapes during their lives. Sometimes they're little bitty and they're caterpillars and they're eating all your sunflowers, like this is eating my sunflower, one of my many volunteer sunflowers. So if you see bugs, don't just spray them, find out what they are. Or better yet, if they're not really bothering anything, especially if you know that they're a good kind of critter, don't spray at all. Now, this is again, this is a caterpillar that I caught in my backyard, and a whole bunch of them were eating up this one particular sunflower, and I didn't mind losing it. But look what they turn into. They turn into a sunflower butterfly, which I thought was pretty cool. I didn't realize there was a specific butterfly for sunflowers, but our state sunflower has a sunflower butterfly. Okay, we are getting to the end of the evening, and my hope for you is that you will be able to say, and I am Deborah Harries, I am not a lazy gardener, I am a satisfied gardener. Are there any questions?
Okay, so Deborah, there was another question that was put in the chat. It was, do you have any suggestions for dealing with grasshoppers?
Oh, golly. Wait. There's not much better we can do except wait. If you happen to see them and you want to kill them, that's your choice. The winter kills them off. I am sure there is a research-based answer to that. Since I don't have it in my head, the best thing I can tell you is to wait. I don't like grasshoppers at all, but they do serve a purpose, but they also eat a lot of our plants. So hang in there for winter to show up, or call the hotline for a better answer, or email me and I'll get you a better answer on that one. Any other questions?
Okay, so one just came in.
Okay.
What is the best thing to do with, and I hope that I'm going to pronounce this right, Asiatic lily stalks after they bloom? Cut back or keep tall?
Oh, golly. You would have to ask me about Asiatic lilies, and I don't do Asiatic lilies. I do daylilies. So that's another one. You'll either need to call the hotline or send me an email, and I can get you. I know there's a handout about those. I don't study them because I don't grow them. So good question, and I don't have a good answer for you. I apologize.
Okay, so I'm not seeing anything else actually come through the chat in terms of questions.
Okay.
I am seeing a lot of positive comments like, thank you for this presentation. It was very helpful. Thank you so much. We enjoyed the presentation.
Great, thank you.
And I am getting a question just came up. Deborah, do you mind if I share your email address, your work email address with everyone who signed up for the program? Would that be okay?
Yeah, let's, let me. Yeah, that was the presentation. Oh, and I am done sharing my screen. So let me just tell you, it's like you see on my screen, Deborah Harries at ksu.edu. There's no space in between my first and last name. So it's DebraHarries at ksu.edu. And I ran through the resources, the references very, very quickly. If you need those, I'm happy to send those out to you. Basically, K-State Research and Extension is a very, very good place to go for your resources. Other good resources are anything.edu that's affiliated with an extension service. I got a lot of information from Clemson. Missouri is another good place. So, and if there are no other questions, I think we're probably finished.
Okay. And Deborah, I just want to thank you, just like everyone else is in the chat, for your incredibly helpful presentation. I learned a lot, they learned a lot, and everybody's just expressing how appreciative they are of your sense of humor and your knowledge. So, and also, honestly, your encouragement to utilize the hotline and all of the knowledge of your fellow master gardeners. So I do want to thank everyone for participating in the program. We have shared a link in the chat for a quick survey. I would ask that you please take a few moments to complete that survey. What we do is we actually use the responses to determine what type of programs we actually offer at the Wichita Public Library. So your feedback is incredibly valuable. Now, we are going to have 2 more gardening programs in our fall gardening series, and virtual ones are actually on Thursday starting at 6. There's still time to register for both. But if you visit our website at wichitalibrary.org/events, you can get a complete calendar. And I do just want to thank all of you for your support of the Wichita Public Library. And this ends tonight's program. So thank you, everybody, and have a fabulous evening. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Tracy.